to tuck in as we're going through this, and I may reference it again as we go along since this just came up today. But okay, steps to emotional fitness to navigate our emotions, and I'll talk to you more about what I mean by the inner GPS. So why do we want to be emotionally fit in the first place? I think in recent years, it has been something that people are starting to become aware as important and healthy to optimize their mental health, to optimize their relationships. And so this whole idea of emotional fitness, which would mean managing your emotions and having a relationship with your emotions that's healthy, productive, versus the opposite, unhealthy, unproductive. So it can help you manage stress, anxiety, depression. We'll talk about how, what that looks like when you're working on emotional fitness. It can definitely enhance relationships, because if you're more self-aware of your emotions and you have a healthy way to express them, that can really go far in fostering stronger connections with people in all aspects of your life. It helps to boost resilience because you're not suppressing. Dr. Mona Lisa Schultz and Dr. Chong, who is out of Canada, both are people that I used to study with, and they both absolutely say, hands down, any emotion that you're not, any stressful emotion that's chronic over time will turn into a disease or some type of ailment. And so if we can address those emotions as they come up, think of the idea, the metaphor of water being stagnant versus flowing freely, and it supports your personal growth. Downside of not dealing with emotions healthily: it can make your symptoms worse. If you have any kind of chronic health condition, it's going to be made worse by anxiety and other stressful emotions. It can have the long-term health effects. You just stay in these patterns of unhealthy coping, and it can really affect our ability to connect with other people, because if we feel uncomfortable sharing our emotions, or we share them in unhealthy ways, then that is really not going to foster those healthy, loving relationships that we want, or the positive ones in our work environment. So specifically, what is emotional fitness? I consider it understanding, navigating your emotions. It's the ability to recognize those emotions, understand where they come from, and why they're presenting themselves to you. They're not coming up, the stressful ones I'm talking about, for no good reason. They're not coming up to sabotage you. They're not coming up because you're weak. They are actually a part of your feedback loop. And I'll explain that too. But this emotional fitness is a very, very crucial aspect of our overall well-being. I would say it's at the core of optimal mental health and emotional health. Okay, so why is it that so many of us get in these modes of not dealing with our emotions in healthy ways? Well, guys, you come by it honestly. Up until now, we have lived in a society where there was really no focus on being emotionally fit. What is it, back in the 40s or 50s, all of a sudden they had the idea of being physically fit. I remember when I was in grade school, it was like you could win the President's Award or something for doing, so much running, sit-ups, pull-ups, and all of that. So they were indoctrinating us into this whole understanding the importance of physical fitness since I was a kid. Now, if they would do the same thing for emotional fitness, I think our world would be a different place. But what were the messages that many of us got instead? And if you got a message similar to this or different, I'd love for you to put it in the chat. But, many of us were told big boys don't cry. Some of us were told as females, girls don't cry. or directly told, don't cry, and or stop crying. And that message discourages the expression of emotions. It discourages being vulnerable. The unconscious belief that you can take on from that is it's not safe to express emotions, and it's not safe to be vulnerable. And this can, over time, if you've taken on that belief, then you will get into a pattern of suppressing your emotions, suppressing your emotions. So if your parents, and most of our parents, and again, they come by it honestly because they weren't taught any different, gave you those messages that you had to be seen, not heard, and you had to be, perfect, or you interpreted their parenting to believe that you needed to be perfect to be loved, that you needed to not show any kind of disruptive emotion to be loved, to be accepted. Then you go your whole life doing that, and it can really destroy certain aspects of your life and then lead to maladaptive habits, behaviors, addictions, self-esteem, depression, you name it. You can be told, stop being so sensitive, especially if you are a highly sensitive person. This is something that you might have heard a parent say. And it's dismissive, and it invalidates a child's emotional experiences. You can be told that as an adult, from one adult to another. If you come across somebody that tells you you're being too sensitive, then I would question whether you really want to have that person in your life, honestly, or you're going to have to set them straight. Okay, so then you might have heard there's nothing to be afraid of, and I don't know that as many people heard that growing up, as I think the flip side of that was being taught to be afraid of so many things. I mean, lots and lots of clients that come through my office, part of their anxiety is because when they were growing up, mom or dad or both were very fearful. And then those fears get built into narratives, basically the worldview that the world is not safe. And then just getting caught up in constant worry, constantly projecting the worst outcome. So that's something I've seen too. So these are basically kind of the unhealthy beliefs we acquire about emotions from, or many of us, from our upbringing. One, it's better to feel numb than to feel stressful emotions. So meaning, if my emotions aren't going to be acknowledged, attended to, cared about, or they're going to be criticized by a parent or a caregiver, many times the child will just say, it's better to not feel my emotions than to feel them and not get my needs met. It's better to not feel my emotions than feel them and have to try to suppress them because I have to be the perfect child. So that's a really insidious one. The other could be, I need to be rational to get my needs met. If you grew up in a household that was stoic, where the parents were very rational and disciplined and all of that, the parents, whether they're intending to or not, can give off this air that emotions are chaotic. They're anything but logical or rational a lot of the time, and they're not to be tolerated in the household. Some people say I'd rather not have my emotions if no one cares about my feelings anyway. I kind of mentioned that earlier. There's nothing to be afraid of. Could be unhealthy if it trends you toward being reckless and not having a healthy sense of caution. If you're an HSP or someone who's highly sensitive, you may have taken on the belief that being emotionally sensitive is weak. It's a flaw. And that can really, really impact your ability to feel confidence going forward in life. and overcoming irrational fears. Okay, so since we're not brought up being taught healthy coping skills for emotions, what happens? We can go into avoidance. So we just avoid or escape our feelings. And so we might try to avoid the situations that make us feel stress, but oftentimes addictions of all kinds are a coping mechanism, a maladaptive behavior, meaning an unhealthy behavior. But here's the important thing to note: with good intention. So if someone is drinking to drown out their sorrow, if someone is smoking to, they perceive that it helps them with stress reduction, those smoke breaks. If someone is looking at porn to just get a feeling of distraction or a feeling of connection with opposite sex, there's good intentions there. But we can get into these patterns of avoiding the emotion and getting into those habitual addictive situations where we're trying to solve the problem, but we're doing it in an unhealthy way. The other thing is we can just go into denial, refusing to acknowledge or validate our own emotions. And typically, if you've met someone who's dismissive of your emotions, who you express how you feel and they downplay it or dismiss it, typically they grew up in a household where their emotions were downplayed, dismissed, disregarded, suppressed, criticized. So people will take on those behaviors because that's how they deal with their own emotions. Numbing, again, this could go back to drugs, alcohol, porn, something like that, engaging in those behaviors, even food. Food is probably the biggest addiction and the oldest addiction because it can start when you're young. And I know some people that binge and purge, and it was just this feeling of beyond numbness, like oblivion is the word. Like just for 5 minutes, 10 minutes while I'm eating this ice cream, I just don't think about anything else. I'm just eating this ice cream and that's all I can think about. I don't have to think about all the stories in my head that make me feel stressed or bad or lonely. And I can just numb out into this oblivion. The other thing is people can get into a habit of overreacting, catastrophizing, responding to their emotions, taking every single one in and acting upon it as if it is the truth. And oftentimes an emotion, we'll find out in a few minutes about that, but oftentimes it's not based on the truth. And it can be an overreaction. So suppressing emotions can really have significant consequences, leading to mental and physical health issues, relationship problems, and a lack of self-awareness and authenticity. The other thing I'd like to add, and this was a huge breakthrough for me, is when I first started doing hypnotherapy. And I was working with the person for depression. I had moved to Southern California. I was in my mid-20s. I lived at the beach. I had a fabulous job, a fabulous life, but I was still having these bouts of depression. And I felt that I had, extracted all the juice from the orange, so to speak, metaphorically, with traditional cognitive behavioral therapy. And I was just still not getting to where I wanted to be mentally and emotionally. So I tried hypnotherapy. And in one of the first couple of sessions, the lady had me follow the feelings back in time. And I ended up at this memory when I was 9 years old. And I was sobbing in that chair like the 9-year-old. And I was like, what the heck? Where did that come from? If you had asked me an hour ago about that memory, I would have told you, yeah, I remember it, but I would have had no emotional feeling about it at all. So on the cognitive level, it was just something that happened to me, right? But on the emotional level, This is what I discovered that day with that session. And it's what hooked me into hypnotherapy is on the emotional level, there is no such thing as time. And so you can be, you can be 20 years, 30 years past an event that was traumatizing to you. And it can still be broadcasting in the back of your subconscious mind, whatever traumatic emotion you felt at the time and whatever belief you took on at the time. So it could be sadness, it could be grief, it could be feeling unloved. And so if an emotion, there's a book I'll recommend here at the end, I think it's called Emotions Buried Alive Never Die. And it's that idea, but they broadcast in the back of your mind until those narratives and stories get healed. And we'll talk about how they get healed. And yeah, thank you, Sean. You said you were told choke it down and man up, right? Yeah. And imagine telling that to a kid, a kid might not even know exactly what that means, but you look at your dad and it means to be quiet, right? So that's a good one too. Choke it down and man up. Okay. So when we have intense emotions that we don't process, that's where things can get unhealthy. So the way that our brains work, the reptilian part of the brain, and let's go back to, again, thinking about childhood, we have an intense emotion. Let's say a dog bites you and you get afraid, you get a rush of adrenaline, and the reptilian part of the brain, it's in survival mode. So that happens, you get that rush of emotion, rush of adrenaline, and literally what that does to your brain chemistry is imprints into your mind that memory as a reference point for survival. So if you get bit by a dog and you're 6 years old and no one really attends to it properly, you could take on a belief that dogs are dangerous. I don't like dogs, right? And that belief and that maybe even irrational fear and discomfort being around dogs can last you your whole life, because once the reptilian brain takes on a pattern, a belief, in its earnest desire to protect you and help you survive, it won't release that belief unless you do some things to shift it, to reframe it, to upgrade the software, so to speak. And so that's how we can get into negative patterns in non-threatening situations. Not every dog is dangerous. We can get into really bad patterns with how we cope with emotions. So, okay, let's go on. So here's some example of current stressful emotions linked to past events. And this is one of the most fascinating things to me about hypnotherapy is oftentimes people come in, they've got their presenting problem, anxiety, fear, sadness, jealousy. We'll go into these examples. And then what it tracks back to, meaning the root cause, the initial event or series of events where the brain took on the pattern of being jealous, being angry, being fearful. Oftentimes, where your mind goes, you wouldn't expect. And that's I think what gets a lot of people stuck is they're trying to track back on a logical level. Why do I have all this anxiety? Why am I overboard with this anxiousness all the time? And they can't pin it on anything. And so they get frustrated. They just feel like they're spinning their wheels. They don't resolve the problem. And then come along hypnotherapy. So example number one, someone has a fear of public speaking, and they feel extreme anxiety before giving a presentation at work, even though the audience is supportive. Now, some people might know what their fear comes from. It might be that the event they remember is a reinforcing of the belief event. So let's just say John remembers that in high school he gave a speech and people laughed at him during the presentation. Well, he could get a rush of adrenaline from that, embarrassment, humiliation, his physiology, his face turns red and all this. And then basically the belief he could have taken on is, public speaking isn't safe. Speaking in front of others leads to humiliation. Now, typically, most people's beliefs, when they have an irrational or unhealthy, unproductive emotion, it actually does track back to something between ages 2 and 9. So, true story, something like this could easily be that was the triggering event to bring the fear forward, the public speaking. But if I was, 9 times out of 10, I'd track it back to something sooner. For example, Johnny sitting at the dinner table and dad insists that no one speak at the table, and Johnny speaks and dad humiliates him. And then so that belief gets taken on back then. It sits in the back of little Johnny's brain. And then he goes out and, 5 or 6 years later, he's in high school, he gives a speech, and the brain goes, oh, I know what this is. This is bad. This is a bad feeling. We've had this before. We're having it now. We are not speaking in front of other people. And so then that intense fear, irrational fear, is a survival mechanism trying to help him avoid situations where he would feel humiliation. And unless you're aware of this and you have a system to identify that for yourself, this feedback loop, you can stay stuck. I had a young woman who came to me for fear of public speaking, and she had just been hired, very young lady, for the position. It was VP of something in the company, and she was super excited, and she was going to be speaking in front of all these C-suite people. And so we were able to help her clear that fear, which was awesome. And she sent me a text afterwards and said, I nailed it. So, okay, fear before surgery. So let's take a situation where someone's experiencing intense fear and anxiety before undergoing a routine medical procedure. I've had people freak out over just getting their blood drawn or getting their blood pressure taken. And so, essentially irrational fear, it's no threat, no imminent danger. And so when I tracked this person back to the root cause where that person took on the fear, as a child, she had to undergo surgery when she was age 6, and she remembered being left alone in the hospital at night. And there was a nurse who came in who was sedating the child next to her, who was screaming. And the nurse said, hey, if you cry, you're going to get these needles. And so in that moment, she got a rush of fear, a rush of adrenaline. Whatever she's thinking at that time, whatever she's concluding is literally going to be seared into her brain as a survival thought mechanism. And so she took on a belief that hospitals are bad and dangerous places where one is vulnerable and alone. So that produces this overwhelming fear and anxiety. I've had so many people for fear of needles. And it goes back to, typically something when they were a little kid. And I had one lady, it went back to her parents forcing her to get an injection. Her father was a doctor, and they basically kind of trapped her in the situation and forced her to get an injection for some medicine they thought she needed. And it was a very powerless feeling. Okay, so time passes. That was like in 2nd grade. So literally like 20 years later, she goes to get injections for weight loss, and she can't do it. She freaks out, and this is what it tracked back to. But once we were able to identify where the mind took on that belief, we're able to break that pattern. we bring it to the conscious, we identify what it is, we identify the beliefs that we're taking on, we clear the energy that kind of glued it into your brain, and then we identify what we want the new beliefs to be. It's super powerful. Okay, jealousy in relationships. I had a woman who was feeling very overwhelmed and jealous with her husband, even when he would talk to someone casually. And she was afraid of being cheated on. And that the triggers were not just being cheated on by by her first husband, but also she watched her dad cheat on her mom and was aware of that when she was a teenager. And it was very discouraging. It was very stressful. It was very disheartening to her. So she basically took on this belief that any attention your partner gives to someone else is a threat to the relationship. And the irony is that I had worked with her husband, her second husband, quite a bit, and he was just this good, steady guy. But there was this overlay, this projection that that extrapolated this belief and this unhealthy behavior into all situations. And so then it was creating a lot of tension and mistrust and pushing her husband away. So we were able to work through that once she identified where it came from. And you think to yourself, like, for me, I've been doing this for so long. I'm like, okay, you can always figure out where it came from. Sometimes you can consciously. Sometimes where you go in a hypnotherapy session again and again will shock you. You'll be like, wow, it's not that you're not knocked out and unconscious, but you're just like, wow, I can't believe those two things are connected that I never knew were connected. But that oftentimes is why people get stuck, because they don't have a way to identify those connections and then clear them. Okay, number 4, overreaction to constructive criticism. So feeling deeply hurt and defensive when a manager provides constructive feedback. What past event? Growing up with a highly critical parent who rarely praised anything. And then the mind internalizes that criticism means I'm not good enough, which is your essence, your identity, and failure. So this inability to accept feedback with people, I've seen it, I've observed it in people I know that I have to interact with for business or in social situations. And this one woman I'm thinking of in particular, anytime you say certain things, she takes it as a criticism. But then, she started revealing to me just in conversations that her parents were super, super strict, very religious, very toe the line, and essentially very critical. And so then anything that even faintly smells like a criticism is taken with defensiveness. Okay. So emotions as part of a healthy inner feedback loop. What do I mean by that? So a great example of how emotions help us to identify where we are out of alignment with our core values. So for example, if you're feeling the emotion of guilt and you're aware that you're feeling that guilt because you lied to someone and you have this core value of honesty that's really important to you, that people are honest to you. Honesty is important in relationships. And then for some reason you lie, you're going to feel guilty. So in that instance, the service of the reason behind that guilt is to clarify for that person that they're out of alignment with their values. Doesn't mean they're a bad person per se. You don't just default into, this person's a horrible person because they lied. It's, oh, okay, if you feel guilt or shame, you want to be looking at where am I out of alignment with my values and what do I need to do to get back in alignment with my values so I can have more peace and feel good about myself and like myself and love myself. The other thing that this healthy inner feedback loop can give you is it reveals where your current narrative and beliefs need upgrading. So not every emotion is the truth in the sense of it's true that you're feeling it, but the narrative, the story that's generating it, or the belief that's generating it may be outdated, inappropriate, unhealthy. And so if you're able to stop suppressing your emotions or beating yourself up for stressful emotions that you have, then you can go a layer deeper and identify what those narratives and beliefs are that need upgrading. Tuning in with your emotions can help you with authentic desires and needs. Have you ever felt resistance to something that you've been asked to do, or you're procrastinating, and then you default into feeling lazy, feeling like you're letting someone down, instead of tuning into what's that resistance about? It is a feeling, resistance, and clarifying where that's coming from, what it's about, is very empowering and leads to a lot of self-confidence. So emotions in this way are also your inner GPS, meaning your intuition can guide you. Resistance to something, maybe you're not supposed to go on that trip that you were invited to. That sounds amazing. And oftentimes we step into a whole other level of confidence when we trust those feelings, even if we don't have facts to back it up. That's huge. That's like next level, guys, when you can do that. Okay. So each emotion is an invitation pointing to a deeper insight, both with yourself, others, especially if you approach it with a spirit of curiosity or exploration. So in that sense, there's no bad emotion. There's no bad emotion. You want to look at every emotion that comes in with what I call interested curiosity. This is interesting. Why is this here? What's this about? What's behind this feeling? So step one is backing up a little bit. You want to ask yourself, is this emotion mine or someone else's? Because if you are an HSP, a highly sensitive person, or you're just tuned in to the people around you, it may not even be your emotion. So emotions can be triggered by the words, actions, expectations of others that you can, as an empath or highly empathetic person, you can feel the emotions of others. Then in your own, if you say, okay, this is my emotion, this isn't something I'm picking up on from the environment. I mean, literally, you can walk into a room where people were fighting and you can feel that energy, and you might just feel that anger seep into you. It does happen. Some people are that sensitive. But if you identify that it is your emotion, you ask yourself, is this uncomfortable emotion, is it baggage, which in my mind means it's going back to something from the past where my mind took on a story, or is it intuition? So if I'm feeling anxious and I just try to suppress it, I don't know if, let's say I'm the person going to have this surgery and I'm feeling anxiety, is it intuition telling me not to use that doctor? Or is it baggage from a childhood memory where I had a bad experience in a hospital? I'll never know if I don't sit with that uncomfortable emotion and explore it with curiosity. So it's very empowering to just do this step one. Is this mine or someone else's? Is this baggage or is it intuition? And we'll go into like, how do you actually figure that out? So you can sit with an emotion. The first thing is to just, when you have the time and the freedom, you just want to sit with it, because sometimes it's like a soap bubble, guys. It'll come in, you'll sit with that feeling. And if you just be present with it, mindful with it, it'll expand. It can just go like a soap bubble pops. And then boom, the awareness of where it's coming from pops in. And then that's your point of power, because once you know what the story is, then you can attend to it. So it helps you with increased self-awareness to just sit with those emotions. It can help you with emotional regulation. And how it does that is you're not just knee-jerk reacting to a feeling as if it's true. So A panic attack is typically someone having the symptoms of anxiety and then interpreting anxiety as bad, gonna get worse, gonna be out of control. So there's the feeling itself, and then it's our response to it. So if a feeling comes up and I don't try to suppress it or beat myself up about it, I'm just like, okay, let's sit with this emotion. What is it about? Just that alone is going to add to emotional regulation, because you're not thrown around by the emotion. You let it come in. You let it bring you the awareness that it wants to bring you, because it's part of your inner GPS and your feedback loop. You're much more in control just by taking that type of attitude with your emotions. And it can really amp up your intuition and your intuitive guidance, like skyrocket, when you don't selectively numb emotions anymore. It's huge. Okay, so how do we do this in practice? Step 2. So an emotion comes up for you. You pause, you tune in, notice what you're experiencing, where you feel it, if there's physical symptoms, etc. And then ask yourself, what is the story behind this emotion? What's the story generating this fear? What's the story generating this sadness? What am I telling myself about myself or a situation that's making me feel X? For example, sad. So then, once you identify what that story is, you may want to look at, okay, does this sadness keep coming up over and over again? Is this same story coming to me over and over again? If yes, and it's stressful to you or unproductive, it is 100% a sign that you're being invited by your very, very wise subconscious mind to upgrade the story, to reframe the story. So remember, when you're a child, you have the mind of a child. So whatever version of the story you took on, it could be your 6-year-old self, your 9-year-old self, your high school self, even a self of you that's 10 years ago. And so you want to uncover any patterns or themes, become aware of that story. Ask yourself if it's valid, in the sense of validity. It's not like asking yourself if it's valid, like, am I crazy? Is it true or not true, which you could ask yourself, but more so it's like, how's that story working for me? Is what I'll say. How's that story working for me? I'll ask my clients that tongue in cheek. How's that story working for you? And oftentimes they're like, oh, it's not working. And I'll be like, okay, well, let's look at changing that story. You do not have to hold on to that perspective. And so you can put 2 people in the ocean at the beach, and it's sunny and there's waves, and, and one person's happy and one person's terrified of sharks. So looking at your stories that you're telling yourself is the crux of the power. So again, you're going to differentiate true story, valid, appropriate, still now, versus something that's an outdated narrative. Okay, the 6-year-old who believes that hospitals are bad and dangerous unilaterally at all times, that's not working for that person. So she had to decide and be very clear with herself in a mindfulness way that no, sometimes hospitals are very useful. Sometimes they save your life. And I'm going for the surgery now, and I'm going of my own volition. And I have the words, the knowledge, and the resources to get support during that process. So that would be taking the same situation from the past, but putting a different spin on it. In hypnosis, we call it a reframe. So you can journal, is one way you can do this. Journal the current story. Challenge any negative self-talk, any limiting beliefs, any beliefs that aren't supporting you in happiness, prosperity, self-love. Any of those types of narratives you want to really dissect. And so why is your subconscious mind serving up this story that's sad to you, shameful to you, stressful to you. It's serving up that story because it wants you to heal the story. It wants you to make peace with whatever that story is, which means reframing it, thinking of it in a different way, taking on new beliefs. So you can then take that story and put it on the shelf. And why? Because it's done its job. It said, hey, Rebecca, here is a story that you keep rehashing in your head over and over again. It's stressing you out. It's unproductive. It's unloving, whatever it is, and you need to change it. Boom. So it gives you this emotion to get your attention. And so then your job is to pay attention, be attentive with interested curiosity, identify the outdated narratives that feel out of sync, unhealthy, disproportionate, and then recognize what the new beliefs are that you want to take on that were embedded in that narrative. A lot of times it's self-worth, self-confidence, self-love, forgiveness, most of the time that, and asking yourself what new beliefs you want to take on that would give you more peace, happiness, self-acceptance. So updating the narratives, updating the story, how you want to think of it, what you want your takeaway to be, what you would wish your beliefs had been that you had taken on. So then our brain keys off of the last way we think of a story. So right in that moment, you've done some healing work, and then you can make peace with it. Okay, I got the lesson. I understand why my subconscious mind was knocking on the door, trying to get my attention with this emotion. It wanted me to attend to this emotional narrative that I need to up level to feel in harmony, to feel productive and in alignment with my thoughts, words, and actions. And it's an inner self-cleaning, self-updating, self-up-leveling, self-optimizing system within you that is, once you tune into it and know how to do it, and you do it with yourself, it's one of the most powerful things you'll ever do for yourself in your life because it's so empowering. Okay, so in many of these stories, you're going to challenge a belief. Well, you're going to challenge the belief that some emotions are negative or bad. So this is evolving your mindset to accept and explore all emotions. So the first thing is there's no bad emotion, period. It may feel bad, but just because it feels bad doesn't mean it's the truth. It's coming to you and it's bringing this bad feeling to get your attention, to invite you to do more work on the story. And maybe you're in a place now of peace where you can do it. And then recognizing all emotions serve a purpose in that way, in that feedback loop, and to guide us. You can practice mindfulness to do this. You can sit with those emotions, like I said, and sometimes they're just like a soap bubble. You sit with it, be present with it, mindful with it for just a few moments, and boom, the emotion will pass. It will pop like a soap bubble. And then what comes right behind it is the story, where it comes from, what's generating it. So then you can reframe your story. You look at emotions as your ally, not the enemy, not something to make you weak, not something you have to suppress or hide. And you can feel your full range of emotions because you can't selectively numb, guys. You can't just numb out sadness, regret. You will become stoic because emotions are like ocean waves. They ebb and they flow. They're all flowing into one another. So you have to be willing to feel them all. And that's true strength. And, on a heart level, when you're going through something painful, someone's done something that hurts you, to keep your heart open instead of shutting down, shutting that person out, is the high level, very spiritual thing to do. Keeping your heart open, feeling whatever feeling you're feeling, and still be present and as non-judgmental as you can. Every person is here in their own time, in their own journeys. And if someone does something to hurt me, typically it's not intentional. It's the old, saying it's not about you. And most of the time it is not. But being able to keep your heart open means being able to feel that sadness or feel the frustration or feel the grief, and keep your heart open is to be alive, very fully alive. Versus you'll see people that have gone through things and they're just shut down. You can see it. They're stoic. They have little affect. Something wonderful happens to them and they're like, yeah, it's okay. Or we'll see, that kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, those kind of people are just so stuck. They're like emotionally constipated, and it can create dis-ease. Why do they call it disease, guys? It's dis-ease. So when you have this different perspective about emotions, you can feel everything and have more compassion for yourself and acceptance towards your emotions. Here's another metaphor. I like to do metaphors. Emotions are like email. They are messages from your subconscious mind. Don't block them, or you could miss an important message, right? Open them regularly for optimal functioning. Yeah, if your mailbox gets too full, we get bogged down, don't we? And then we're very stressed, or we miss something important, right? Same with your emotions. Pay attention to them, observe them as they come in, instead of, there's times and situations where you can't really attend to a wave of sadness while you're in the middle of a business meeting, but within a few hours you can do that. So just like your emails, open your emotions regularly, pay attention to them. Just like your emails, some of those emotions contain vital information that could save your life. So many people on 9/11 said they just had this feeling not to go to work that day. The voice inside of me said, change your flight. So, and it was a feeling. It was a feeling with the narrative that was with that. Some emotions you need to respond to and take actions accordingly, just like your emails. Some are soliciting help. So you can reframe the story, change the beliefs that are generating that emotion, and some you should just unsubscribe from. So that means if you have some pesky story that's creating low self-esteem for you, making you feel bad about yourself, you need to just unsubscribe from that story, from that feed, and subscribe to the new one, which is positive self-talk, self-love, encouragement, acceptance. That's the first time I've done that metaphor, so I don't know if you guys like it. I kind of do. What's the story behind the emotion? Again, identify the emotion. What are you feeling? Where do you feel it? Reflect on, what might have triggered it, because sometimes you'll have a feeling and it'll be triggered from something that happened 5 hours ago. And so try to understand if there was some current circumstances that triggered it. What's the story behind that? Even if it's irrational, you have to pay attention to it. Don't suppress it just because you think it's irrational. Listen to the story. Hear the story that's in your head, and then don't be afraid to share with someone, hey, I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling sad and this is my story. It's your story today. Stories are come today and gone tomorrow, right? So it's okay for you to verbalize and acknowledge what that story is, because once you're aware of it, then you can question the validity. You can assess whether it's still valid for current situations that are similar. You can ask yourself if that narrative is supporting you in greater levels of self-love and success and happiness. And so it's very, very powerful to do this. And then you can, once you've identified those outdated narratives, you can, again, examine the origins, challenge it, reframe it, and visualize the updated narrative. Reinforce the new narrative. When your mind wants to go into the old story, You make yourself go into the new story, and sometimes it could be, something has been a failure or you have failed in some way. Okay. Well, instead of telling yourself you're a failure or you're a loser, you're this, you're that, what did I gain from this? What did I learn from this? What's my takeaway that I can go forward with and be at peace with this, be neutral or above the line? So here's some books I recommend. The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. And it explores how trauma impacts the body and mind. Same with The Divided Mind. Number 4, if you have any kind of health issues, I highly, highly recommend book 1 and 4. They will just open your eyes to how powerful it is to become aware of your emotions in order for healing. For chronic health issues, disease, cancer, pain, chronic pain, it's all in there in those 2 books. And it's really, really an important concept to integrate into optimal living, is to understand how your emotions are influencing your health issues. The second book, Permission to Feel, Unlocking the Power of Emotions to Help Our Kids and Ourselves and Our Society Thrive. If I could have one nonprofit that I was in charge of, it would be for emotional fitness, to teach parents and their kids how to healthily process emotions. It is so powerful to sit with a child and say, what's going on? You're anxious. It's about school. What's the story you're telling yourself? And then support that child. Maybe they're anxious about a test. They feel insecure, or they're afraid of failure. So you can talk them through that, talk them to a new narrative, a positive narrative, identify in that narrative what their limiting beliefs are, and really train them to do this inner feedback loop themselves. Emotional Intimacy, Comprehensive Guide for Connecting with the Power of Your Emotions. This one's great for just getting to know yourself. There's a whole chapter on shame, fear. It's a really powerful book. I recommend that one as well. Okay, so in conclusion, your emotions are part of your inner feedback loop. They are messages from the subconscious mind. They're your personal truth, not universal truth, but you can up-level that truth by changing your narrative. You can't selectively numb emotions. And those emotions that are coming up also provide you intuitive guidance, being able to take right action when you don't have all the information. That's like basically a whole other talk for another day. And they reveal where you can upgrade your beliefs to feel happier, healthier, and more productive. Lao Tzu said, "He who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened." I love that quote. Final slide here. I hope this has been useful to you. Every week, I try to sit down and think about what can help you guys optimize mind and emotions. And so if you want to work with me privately, you can reach out to me. You can email me at Rebecca Shaw, CCH, which stands for Certified Clinical Hypnotherapist at gmail.com. You can DM me through where this video is posted. And if you're interested in private coaching and hypnotherapy, you can book a free 15-minute consultation with me through my website. All right, guys, take care, and all my love and to each of you. Have a great week. Bye.